A lot of people dream of living on Venice Island, which is where I am right now, but there's a few things to put into consideration, some trade-offs that I want to put on your radar versus living in the mainland area of Venice. So, Venice Island, first of all, let's start off with the big pros of it. Obviously gorgeous. You got lots of parks like this all over, quite walkable. As you can see, this park's got trails through it. A lot of Venice Island, you're gonna get sidewalks, which is a huge win. A lot of times in other parts of Venice, if you wanna have sidewalks, you're probably gonna have to live in an HOA community, which, you know, for some people is a pro or a con. You may or may not want that. But if you're not in an HOA community, there's a chance you're not gonna get sidewalks. There's also a lot of street lights, things like that. So, you know, those are some of the nice perks that you're gonna get included just with your taxes. You know what I mean? Whereas if you live in a gated community or a planned community with those sidewalks and street lights, you're going to be paying taxes, plus you're gonna be paying the community tax, which is your HOA fees or CDD fees, to get those sorts of things. So I think that's a nice little perk to start off with. Outside of that, of course, you're gonna be close to the beaches. You're going to be close to the downtown. And so all the, you know, mom and pop restaurants and shops and things like that that come with that are gonna be easily accessible. Your beach access is gonna be a lot quicker. You could very highly likely be able to walk, or at the minimum, I would say bike or golf cart to the beach. And, you know, to do so, it could be like a 5-10 minute thing. A drive would definitely be 5 minutes or less. And so those are all the biggest perks to start off with. However, there's some other things to put into consideration. The first being the homes. Now, I actually chose to film in this area just to give you a sense for kind of what's out there for homes. So I'm gonna take it off of me for a second. And you can see, I mean, there's some wonderfully gorgeous homes, but you can also see, I'm gonna zoom in on this one actually here. A lot of these homes are going to be, you know, they're gonna have a lot of that classic Mediterranean style to them, and a lot of them are very, very unique, which is obviously overall at its face a pro, right? Because they're just got that appeal, that wow factor, and a certain look to them. But as you can also tell, they're typically going to be older homes. So that brings up with it a whole nother bunch of questions. The first being is, how old is it and what needs to be updated into it? You know, what's the roof condition like? What kind of pipes are you talking about? Does it need a lot of, you know, remodeling on the inside or the out to meet safety requirements and, you know, help mitigate issues from hurricanes and flooding and things like that? We'll talk more about that kind of stuff. But on top of that, just, you know, maybe the inside isn't as modern as you would like, or maybe you like the classic look, but it's just really beat up, you know, because it is an older home and hasn't been updated in a long time. So those are all little things that you're gonna have to put into consideration. And of course, with that, when we talked about all the first things, you know, like the location being close to the beaches and the downtown and all that kind of stuff, you're also paying for location by being on Venice Island, right? Because you have such close proximity to all those things, the price point goes up. So you're getting an older home, possibly something really nice and really cool like one of these, but at the same time, you know, your price is going to be going up because of your access to so many things to do. Back to one of the other things I mentioned in the beginning, the walkability of it. I mean, again, like if you're in a planned community in a lot of Venice, sure, you might be walkable within your community, but you're probably not gonna be able to walk to like a downtown with all kinds of shops and restaurants, or, you know, there's a gas station on Venice Island, a Publix, you know, a lot of things that you could get to really easily and walk to, bike to, golf cart to, or a short drive to. So because of that, the price point is going to be higher. However, on the flip side of that, not being on Venice Island, depending on where you're located, it may be more advantageous for you if, let's say, you want to have quick access to an Aldi or a Walmart or a Target. There's a lot of that kind of stuff like in the South Venice type area, also like towards Venice Gardens in the mainland. There's a lot of, you know, more of those big box store shopping amenities. Venice Island, you're mainly talking Publix and like, you know, like a 7-Eleven gas station, things like those are going to be your big chains, but there's outside of that, you're not going to get like big box store shopping. That being said, you're not very far from all those different shopping amenities by being on the island as well. So, you know, it's sort of a pro and con to each area, and it's something that you have to decide for yourself what you want to be closer to. And as far as budget goes, you know, that's going to run the gamut. You can get into the millions of dollars off the island. You can get into the millions of dollars very easily on the island. You can go as, I'd say, low as about maybe 400, 300,000. It just depends on the type of home you're looking at on Venice Island, but generally you're talking about something small, older, good chances, you know, if you want to be below, I'd say around 300,000 or maybe a little less, you're talking a condo. And then that brings with it other monthly fees, HOA fees and things like that, which, you know, a lot of times will cover like your water bill and things like that. So it's not a complete like payment towards the quote unquote house. Sometimes it'll get you some things, maybe cable, television, or internet, things like that, potentially. Again, each one's different. But, you know, as you get closer to the water, which is over here, then you're gonna start seeing that price point go up very, very quickly. Because, you know, quick beach access is going to be more expensive, which comes with it a bunch of other expenses that we'll get to in a second. But those are all some things to consider, you know, and I'm trying not to give too concrete a pricing in this video, just for the fact that, as you know, the market in Venice and Florida for that matter is pretty volatile, but generally, as a rule of thumb, you know, you could expect things to be higher priced on the island. And again, I would say like bare minimum, you're looking at like $500,000 on up. And again, like $500,000 when we're talking a house on Venice Island, it's probably not going to be right. It's definitely not going to be right by the beach. I'll tell you that much. And it's probably going to, you know, be smaller, maybe need some work, things like that. So I don't want to give anyone that expectation like, oh yeah, I could move to Venice and live on the island and get a house for $500,000 and it's not going to need to be touched and it's going to be big. No, you know, you got to put all the pieces into place and understand kind of what, you know, what the package is going to include, the quote unquote package of the house, right? But if you're looking to buy or sell a home in the area, as always, we'd love to help you. We've helped a lot of people move to the area, avoid mistakes, and get answers to those questions that are often impossible to find online. 941-221-1897. We'd love to help you. We serve anywhere from Sarasota down to the Port Charlotte, Inglewood areas, and we would love to help you too. And we can definitely help you navigate that process more if you are thinking about moving to Venice Island or off the island for that matter, and any of the surrounding cities. Now, as you can see, I've already been walking for not very long in this video, and this is another park, a different one, West Blaylock Park. This park's really cool. Again, another perk of Venice Island during Christmas. All kinds of different like people and organizations and businesses locally, they'll pick a tree and they'll basically like sponsor that tree and they'll decorate it their own way. And so there's all these different kinds of decorations throughout the whole park. It's super magical, awesome to walk through during Christmas. But even not during Christmas, there's all kinds of different plants with signs that basically tells you like where they're from, how they like to be maintained. So that's again, like another one of the nice little perks to living on Venice Island is some of those things that are free to access and just, you know, nice to go up for a walk and give you something to do. A lot of times when we have friends and family come into town, we'll take them there just to walk around and take a look at the different plants and things like that, especially from people that aren't from Florida. It's just kind of fun to see some of the plants and vegetation that, like, I'm from Wisconsin originally, that we can't grow up there, you know? So just kind of a neat little thing and a nice perk to being on the island. And while we're at it, so that was West Blaylock Park. Over here, you got the Venice Museum. You've got a little history thing. I'm not even sure. This is brand new. So that's kind of cool. I actually have not seen this yet. We haven't been over to this little pocket in a little while. And we saw this being built a while ago, but now it's all done, which is pretty cool. And there's just a lot of stuff like this throughout Venice Island. So, I mean, those are all the perks. You got the Venice Theater, you know, for like acting and plays, not like a movie theater. There's the Performing Arts Center. There's just all kinds of cool stuff on the island that is awesome to have access to. There's a library. So really, really cool. And obviously the vibes. I mean, the palm trees, the landscaping. It's just really, really nice. And obviously with having multiple sidewalks to be able to do walks like this and go around, again, adds to that value. Now, I think most people that would be looking to move to Venice Island, you know, generally more people are looking to just live here and have a nice low-key relaxed lifestyle and maybe, you know, be retired, maybe work from home, whatever the case may be. But I don't think you're necessarily looking at most people here, you know, having a 9-to-5. That being said, that's not the case for everyone. I'm sure there's plenty of people that still do have a 9-to-5. So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of work opportunities and commute versus, you know, being on the island versus the mainland. Now, if you're on Venice mainland, again, it can run the gamut. Like, you could be in a planned community, you could be in South Venice or Venice Gardens where there's no HOA, and your commute time can vary greatly depending on, you know, are you really far back from the gate of your gated community? Are you just tucked pretty far back in South Venice or Venice Gardens for that matter? And so with that, you know, could come quite a bit of a drive just to get to 41, aka Tamiami Trail. Again, same with Venice Island. Could take a little while to get to Tamiami Trail. So over there, you know, it's gonna depend on the house. You know, as a whole, I would say it's kind of a wash. It's probably equal as far as commute to get to, you know, let's say a bigger city like Sarasota for more work opportunities, or like Tampa. You know, obviously a little bit more of a drive there. You're talking about an hour to get up to Tampa. Sarasota, about 35 to 45 minutes, depending on what part of Venice you're in. And then, you know, you could go south to like Fort Myers. And again, you're looking at about hour and a half drive to get there, depending on what part of Fort Myers. So your opportunities right in Venice, there is some, absolutely, but it's going to be a little bit more limited. You know, you're talking more tourist type things, medical, teaching, obviously the trades, you know, heating, air conditioning, remodeling, construction are all opportunities. Fishing and boat tours and things like that are a possibility. And then a lot of obviously like shopping and restaurants, you know, being a employee at one of those types of businesses. So those are kind of your main opportunities right in Venice as far as work goes. And then as far as medical, we had a hospital actually right on Venice Island, which went out of business right, I think it's like a year after the brand new Sarasota Memorial Hospital opened in North Venice. So if you're living on Venice Island, it's going to be a little bit more of a drive to get to that, but overall not very much of a drive at all. And you know, you're talking like 10 to 15 minutes tops. And you know, if you're living on the south end of Venice, again, it could be about 10-15 minutes just to get to that same hospital. So unless you're living towards the north end of Venice, you're looking at a little bit of a drive to get to it. And actually, just so you know, I'm about getting to the downtown. You can see over here, we're starting to see a little more downtown action type stuff. So before we get to the downtown, I figured I should mention one other thing that I started talking about with Venice Island. And you know, you can see the homes, as I said, generally they're gonna be a little bit older, more Mediterranean style. What are you gonna get off the island? What's the age? Again, that can run the gamut. It depends. You know, if you're talking like South Venice, or Venice Gardens, you could be looking at something from maybe the 50s, but more realistically 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, possibly early 2000s, and a very few past, you know, the early 2000s. And then the style, I mean, everything. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of stuff. I shouldn't say everything, but there's quite a bit of variety, and you know, a little bit more variety than I'd say with than what Venice Island's gonna get you. As you can see though, Venice Island does have variety, and that's kind of one of the charms to the area, is that actually over here there's some condos and things like that, and townhomes, and you know, more different ways to live on Venice Island. But on top of that, just, you know, every home is going to, while be overall sort of Mediterranean looking, a little bit different, you know. So it's if you're talking about living in a planned community, it might look a little more cookie cutter. South Venice, Venice Gardens, there's a little more variety. Here, there's gonna be a little bit more variety. So if that's important to you, you know, having variety in the homes, Venice Island, Venice Gardens, South Venice could all be good options. And there's even a few planned communities that I think would do pretty well as far as that goes as well. But there are some planned communities where definitely just about every house looks almost the same. Okay, let's talk a little bit about lifestyle. You may have thought I already talked about it with, you know, the downtown and things like that, but there are definitely some other big differences with these areas. So when we're talking lifestyle differences as far as Venice Island versus not on the island, how do I put this? Off the island, again, it could be a very big variety because it just depends on where you're going to be. If you're in a planned community, obviously going to be a little more suburban, quiet, tucked in, but you could also maybe get really quick access to, you know, some big box store type shopping, commercial amenities, things like that. You know, like you're talking like your Walmarts, your Targets, things like that. So if you're really close to that kind of stuff, there might be a little bit more hustle and bustle. It just depends on how close you are to that kind of stuff. But as a whole, I would say most of, you know, Venice, when you're not on like Tamiami Trail, you know, and a few other scattered parts of different roads, generally speaking, it's going to be a quieter, more residential feel. As you can see with Venice Island, it is very quiet, very chill, very relaxed, and lots of sidewalks and all that kind of stuff, and walkable. But you also have the downtown, and there's obviously a seasonality to all of Venice, but I would say it impacts the island more. You know, when we're talking shopping and restaurants, yeah, the entire city for sure. Your Walmart, your Target, all that's gonna get busier during the winter months. But Venice Island particularly is a pretty stark contrast, winter versus summer. Like, for example, look at the parking situation right now. There's a fair amount of cars parked out and things like that, but it's not completely packed. When the winter comes, it will be packed. Can almost guarantee you that. You know, basically after about 11 o'clock a.m., it's going to be packed and pretty hard to find parking in a lot of Venice Island because Venice has just become this big hot spot that a lot of people know about and love. And so more people move to the area with the growth of, you know, the Welland Park area, which you don't have to tell me, I know is technically Northport. It does have Venice addresses, but utilities and all that is Northport, but that's added to the area's population. North Venice has definitely grown. And so you put all that together and we've started to see, you know, a lot more people here in the winters and just people coming to vacation. So with that brings a little bit more hustle and bustle that time of year, but it also brings a certain energy to living on the island. But more packed restaurants, more congested roads, more congested parking situation. So those are all things you're gonna have to put into consideration when you're thinking about moving to the area. You know, versus if you're living in a planned community or South Venice or Venice Gardens, you know, you're actually like where you're living isn't gonna get that much busier. However, one other thing to point out, because nuance is very big key here, I'm talking about mainly this area here and the main roads like Venice Avenue, Harbor, you know, so those are like gonna be two of your roads that are more traveled during the winter months. But those neighborhoods I was just walking through before, those are still gonna overall maintain a pretty quiet vibe, unless there's something big going like the Christmas parade or something like that, which a lot of people show up for, won't park blocks away for. But outside of that, you're looking at, you know, things overall being pretty quiet in the other neighborhoods. So that being said, you know, you can have the best of both worlds still being on Venice Island. But yeah, you know, you could still be in a very quiet, tucked in neighborhood and still have your quick access to the beaches, you know, the downtown and things like that. Also, one other thing, of course, to note is the beaches are also going to have a big difference in how packed they get, you know, in the summer versus the winter. Summers are awesome here, honestly. Like, I know a lot of people wouldn't like the heat and humidity. Me, I don't mind, but a lot of people don't. But for the upside of having less packed restaurants and roads and parking and beaches, overall it's a pretty big win in my opinion. Okay, and then we also got to talk about one of the other really big costs, and that's going to be your insurance and your property taxes and all that kind of stuff. I think more so the thing we need to talk about though is insurance and your risk along with that. So obviously being closer to the water is going to give you a higher risk, right? Storm surge could be a potential issue. I'll say this, we've seen a fair amount of hurricanes and big tropical storms go through in the last 3-ish years, basically since like Ian was a pretty big one. And the main thing as far as storm surge that we saw was last summer. I think there was like 2 storms actually that ended up affecting some of the homes closer to the water. And that's the thing you have to understand. If you're really close to the water, I would say within about a block, your risk goes up. Now there's also a lot of factors that go into that. What's the drainage like in that area? How is the home built? Is it elevated? You know, like if you're in a little maybe mini community or a condo or things like that, you know, like how is that? How's the structure? How is it? Is it elevated? What's the drainage like in that specific area? How close are you from the water? Obviously is going to be a really big factor, because just being, you know, a block away versus 2 blocks away could make a big difference. Being half a block away could be a big difference depending on the storm. But there are things like Flood IQ, which is a really cool like interactive map that you can get, and basically you can pull up on that map if it's a Category 5 storm and storm surge comes in, how likely are you to get hit? And it'll show you like how far basically that water would get pushed in. So when I say storm surge, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically the water being pushed right from the ocean, from the waves just getting pushed inland. That's storm surge, and that's something you gotta definitely be careful for. Well, actually, I'm gonna turn around here so I can go back over this way, back towards the downtown a little more. Those are all things you're gonna wanna be aware of, because your risk is going to go up for flooding from that storm surge. Outside of that, you know, like the wind damage and, you know, just rain, it's going to be a little bit higher being closer to the water, just because hurricanes feed on that warm water and that's kind of what powers them. So being, you know, a mile or 2 or obviously more inland is going to help, you know, the storm sort of die out and make the rain and the wind a little bit weaker. But, you know, a mile or 2 is probably not going to make a huge difference. But as you get further and further in, it's going to help a little bit more. But that being said, you know, every storm is different. Location is going to matter. The home itself, you know, as far as how it's constructed, the age, the windows, the roof, there's so many pieces that go into it that are going to affect your risk as far as damage goes, storm surge, flooding. You know, obviously being closer to the water is going to increase your risk, but you could still potentially have a home in the mainland, you know, off Venice Island, flood if it's not set up the right way as far as the home, the community, and the infrastructure and all those sorts of things. So those are all things you should be putting into consideration. And obviously I don't expect you to know everything with that, which is why if you are looking to move to the area, get a hold of us and we can help you navigate that more, because we know the area very, very well and been here quite a while, and understand after seeing some storms, okay, this is a risk, this is definitely not a risk. We kind of know what the insurance companies are looking for, which brings me to the next point, which is insurance. Your insurance generally is going to be higher on Venice Island. Again, though, there's going to be some nuance with that. It depends on how close you are to the water, the age of the home, the condition of it, and the infrastructure around it, the drainage, all those sorts of things. Venice Mainland, another thing to put in consideration that you're not going to see as much on Venice Island is on, the mainland. A lot of communities will have retention ponds and things like that to help with drainage. So again, there's just a lot of factors to put into consideration, but as a whole, I would say being on the island, your risk is typically going to be a little bit higher. And so because of that, your insurance is going to typically be higher. Again, it's not an across-the-board thing, though. There could be a place on Venice Mainland where you're going to pay more for insurance versus one on that Venice Island. So it just kind of depends. And then also one thing to know is, a lot of people are worried like, oh, I don't want to get surprised with, if I buy a home in either location, like with what my insurance cost is going to be. I don't want to get kind of, blindsided by that. And you don't have to worry about that because you can get quotes on it before you move into the home. So again, we can help you with that process if you are looking to move to the area, and give you a better sense for before you buy a home. Hold on, what's my total monthly cost? Because obviously you want to know what you're getting into. You need to know what you're getting into. We highly recommend you know what you're getting into on all fronts, the property taxes, the insurance costs, all that kind of stuff. So we can definitely help you navigate that process. If you are looking to buy or sell in the area, get a hold of us, 941-221-1897. We can help you find answers to those questions that are often impossible to find online, avoid mistakes, and help you save a bunch of money. And if you want to know more about what it's like to live in Venice, Florida, check out this video right here. Thanks for watching, and live breezy.